Sup, chooms, how y'all living? Hope everything is Nova and you're all having a preem week. So, I don't know if you chooms have noticed it, but there's been an awful lot of recent anti-finasteride reporting in the mainstream media as of late. In the past, anti-finasteride rhetoric was strictly the domain of social media, and with a few exceptions, traditional media sources generally stayed away from the finasteride debate. But things have changed, and the timing couldn't possibly be worse. As I've reported in previous videos, finasteride's existence is currently in jeopardy. The drug's legality is under review by the European Medicines Agency, also known as the EMA, which is the governing body for medicines in the European Union, much the same way the FDA is the governing body in the United States. My initial take was dismissive, as I didn't think anything would ever seriously come out of this, especially since similar actions were taken against finasteride in the United Kingdom and in the United States that both failed spectacularly. But I recently heard from another hair tuber, Vera Villon, that the investigators from the EMA have pretty much all made up their mind already before they even began the investigation, and they've now decided that unverified online anecdotes are more important than scientific research. If the finasteride haters succeed in the European Union, this will empower them to try again in other nations like the USA and the UK. And with the conspiracy theorists like RFK Jr. currently leading the Department of Health and Human Services, which oversees the largest regulatory health agencies in the United States, including the FDA, I think it is probable that the anti-finasteride movement will be successful this time. I thought the anti-finasteride movement was largely defeated in the past. When I created this channel a long time ago, I set out to change the narrative about finasteride since I myself fell victim to all the rampant fear-mongering online about the drug, and in the past several years, I believe that pro-finasteride influencers such as myself and others have helped change the narrative about finasteride. 10 years ago, finasteride was seen as a last resort treatment that even hair loss communities warned people against taking. But these days, the pendulum has swung, and even Trestless, which is the largest hair loss community on the internet, is now an overwhelmingly pro-finasteride community, while anti-finasteride communities like the PFS Foundation and Moral Medicine are dead or dying. But in the past few months, the lamestream media has breathed new life into the rotting corpse of the anti-finasteride movement, and hair loss sufferers are now faced with a brand new monster that threatens the safety of all of our hair follicles. But there is nothing to worry about here, chooms. I am a hair loss witcher, and killing monsters is my speciality. So, unsurprisingly, the media is reporting anecdotes of people whose lives have been supposedly ruined by finasteride, and they ignore the vast amount of scientific evidence that goes against this narrative. The first major article came from the BBC, where they interviewed a guy named Kyle who made a whole bunch of unverified claims that finasteride ruined his life. I made a video responding to this article, and as it turned out, Kyle lied to the BBC about pretty much everything. The details he gave the publication were direct contradictions to what Kyle himself wrote on his own Reddit account, which revealed that he misled the BBC about several important details. For example, he said that finasteride made him depressed, yet he didn't mention that his girlfriend left him, which is certainly an external factor that could have contributed to his depression. He also even praised finasteride just 6 months ago, saying that he wished he started topical finasteride sooner, even though he told the BBC that it has been a year since he last took finasteride. The guy also tried to blame me personally for him developing all these problems, as he wrote a comment to me claiming that he was an avid viewer of my channel, which inspired him to take finasteride, yet when I clicked on his profile, he didn't have any history of ever having commented on my channel before, which makes me think he's probably lying about that as well. If he really were a fan of my channel, he probably would have commented at least once in the past, especially if he were feeling apprehensive about finasteride. There are a lot of other things he lied about as well, but I don't want to get too off track with this video, so I'll go ahead and link my video where I go over the BBC article down below in the description if you want to watch it. In the case of these recent articles, though, we don't have the same receipts to prove that the subject of the article is deliberately lying, but the articles have many of their own problems regardless. Here's an article from the Wall Street Journal that covers exactly one person who claims that finasteride caused all sorts of health problems, and it has quotes from a urologist who obviously never treats anyone for hair loss, claiming that no young people should ever take it. The story was picked up by the Daily Mail that wrote their own article which basically said the same thing. So, both articles about this one guy named Mark Millick who acquired finasteride from an online telehealth company, and he's upset because the company didn't warn him that all these horrible things were going to happen to him, and now he claims that he's still living with debilitating side effects even though he stopped using the drug in 2021. Some of the persistent side effects he claims to have are reduced libido, lost muscle definition, stretchy skin, blunted emotions, and genitals that shrink and change shape. This all sounds really horrible, and imagine your average layman who has never heard of finasteride would be terrified of the drug after having read this. But the fact is that nothing that is reported in this article is backed up by any scientific information whatsoever. I don't question whether he has symptoms, and I accept that he believes they are due to finasteride, but there is no evidence that any of what he has experienced has anything to do with finasteride. But the content is so wild and sensationalist that it has gained traction in the press, and there have been other recent hit pieces against finasteride published as well. In fact, there was even a documentary video from Canada that also appeared on French television, and even I made an appearance on that documentary.
Un retard critique alors que la popularité du finastéride ne cesse d'augmenter, propulsée par l'arrivée de versions génériques du produit.
This is on finasteride. It's one of the most powerful medications that we have to combat male pattern hair loss.
I think it is the absolute best long-term treatment for fighting hair loss.
Sur le web, une foule d'influenceurs, comme ceux qui ont séduit Mark Turner, chantent les louanges du finastéride. Et certains tournent ces risques au ridicule.
Communities where you see the most incel rage against finasteride are online communities that also promote other conspiracy theories like moon landing denialism, 9/11 truthism, cholesterol denialism, lizard people, and Jewish space lasers. Let me tell you, Chooms, it has always been a lifelong dream of mine to appear on French television where a bunch of hot French women get to see me do my work as a hair loss witcher, but this was not a very flattering depiction of me at all, especially since they showed me right after they talked about someone who committed suicide, almost as if they were implying that I was somehow responsible for it, which is incredibly offensive and borderline defamatory. But this kind of media attention is having an impact on the distribution services responsible for providing us with finasteride even before the EMA decision is complete. Telehealth companies that sell finasteride, like Hims, recently took a huge hit in the stock market thanks to growing fear about finasteride being perpetuated by the lamestream media. The fact that we're seeing a strong resurgence of anti-finasteride reporting that just so happens to coincide with the EU investigation on finasteride will definitely increase the possibility that it will be taken off the market, especially since I've been hearing that the investigators in the EU already have a negative opinion about finasteride and are not showing any skepticism to these anecdotal media reports. And like I said earlier, I definitely can see something similar happening here in the United States now that RFK Jr., who holds an extremely negative opinion about most modern medicine, is in charge of the nation's health. What makes this reporting from the press so egregiously awful, though, is that it is lopsided in its bias against finasteride. They basically are picking the same 2 or 3 people claiming that finasteride ruined their life, and they're interviewing doctors who have a strong history of authoring flawed anti-finasteride studies with selection bias issues, many of which I've talked about on this channel, which you can find on the Post-Finasteride Syndrome playlist, which I'll link below. There is no excuse for this, because as articles are being published, we got some brand new scientific research that not only reaffirms the already well-established safety profile of finasteride, but it also shows that the whole basis of post-finasteride syndrome is completely fraudulent. Yet at no point did the lamestream media ever bother to discuss this. They reported on this topic as if post-finasteride syndrome is a widely accepted medical condition, when the reality is that the opposite is true. Here's the new study that was just published this month. The article points out that even though finasteride was approved in 1992 to treat an enlarged prostate and then in 1998 to treat hair loss, reports of so-called post-finasteride syndrome didn't really start appearing until the 2010s. So, the study used a specific database of drug adverse effects that is often used by people promoting PFS. This database is the FDA Adverse Event Reporting System, also known as the FAERS database, not to be confused with the VAERS database, which refers to vaccines. So specifically, the investigators wanted to see when and how frequently the 2 worrisome PFS symptoms, depression and suicide, appeared in the database. They computed what's called the reporting odds ratio, or ROR. What that means is the ratio between the likelihood of reporting the adverse effects of interest, specifically depression and suicide, in people taking the drug of interest, which of course is oral finasteride, versus those people not taking finasteride. If people are more likely to get depression or attempt suicide due to finasteride use, this ROR would be greater than 1. The analysis was performed in 3 different time periods: 2006 to 2011, 2013 to 2018, and 2019 to 2023. The year 2012 was excluded because that was the year that the PFS Foundation formally declared that PFS is a real thing. Not only that, the investigators looked at the same information for dutasteride. They reasoned that if 5-AR blockers cause depression and suicide, then you'd expect to see even more problems like that with dutasteride compared to finasteride, just because dutasteride is a stronger 5-AR blocking drug than finasteride is. So, the results were very interesting to say the least. So what I'm showing you here are the results for finasteride. Here's what the different colors mean. Green means that the adverse event was not reported in the FAERS database for each set of years. Yellow means the event was reported, but there was no statistical difference from the incidence of the event in people not on finasteride. Finally, red means that the incidence of the event was statistically higher than in people not on finasteride. So you can see that before 2012, there was no indication that different forms of suicidal behavior were more frequent with finasteride than with any other drugs. However, ever since 2013, when PFS became widely publicized, the incidence of several different kinds of suicidal behavior has become significantly increased. But here's the weird thing here, chums. If you look at dutasteride, there is no evidence of increased suicidal behavior before or after 2012, even though dutasteride is basically the same drug as finasteride, except it's much more powerful. So the investigators go through the results in more detail and have tables showing the ROR values for the different eras, but that really doesn't add anything to the figures I just showed. So the investigators note that the study does show an association between finasteride and suicidal depression, but the time course suggests that this association started around 2012 and wasn't seen at all in the 6 years of reports before 2012. In addition, there was no evidence of a link between suicide and depression with dutasteride, despite it being a much stronger 5-AR blocking drug. So how does this make any sense? It doesn't, because post-finasteride syndrome isn't real. So what do we make of all this? Well, the authors think there are two factors involved. They say, quote, "This increase may be due to several factors. In 2012, the US FDA updated the finasteride package insert to include information on the so-called PFS. An article on persistent sexual dysfunction and depressive symptoms associated with oral finasteride gained significant media attention around that time. And in July 2012, the PFS Foundation was established to support research on so-called PFS," unquote. On the other hand, the fact that the same increase in reports of suicide did not occur with dutasteride most likely shows that the increased reports for finasteride are due to disproportionate reporting, meaning selection bias due to overreporting from social media contamination. So the authors recommend that people getting finasteride be screened for pre-existing psychiatric problems if they are predisposed to depression, and that such people may not be suitable as candidates to receive finasteride. I agree with this completely, because people with pre-existing mental health problems are going to be much more susceptible to a nocebo effect from the drug. People with a history of depression are much more likely to get depression, and if they get depression from anything, but they took finasteride at any point in their lives, they're going to blame it on finasteride, and then go to big media outlets to scare other people away from using finasteride. So a lot of people online think I am this pro-finasteride zealot, but I'll be the very first person to tell people that they shouldn't use finasteride if they are terrified of it. My channel already has hundreds of videos dedicated to helping people overcome their fear about finasteride, including a video specifically about how to overcome the nocebo effect. But if you can't get over your fear of finasteride, then I don't want you to take the drug, because I know you're going to give yourself a nocebo effect and then go online or go to big media to scare other people away from the drug. The finasteride community doesn't want that or need that. If you are more afraid of finasteride than you are of hair loss, then there is nothing wrong with just accepting baldness and getting on with your life. That's what Bald Cafe's channel is for, after all. I know finasteride isn't for everybody, and I know that because we already know from previous research that in cases of people who report having post-finasteride syndrome, over half of them have a pre-existing history of psychiatric problems or a family history of psychiatric problems. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't take finasteride because you have psychiatric problems, but you need to get over your anxiety of the drug first. If you can't do that, then finasteride is not for you. We know for a fact that the nocebo effect is a real thing, and it is extremely powerful, especially in the case of finasteride. Here we have a study that randomized people to be warned about sexual side effects before starting finasteride versus people who were not told anything special about sexual side effects, and it showed a much higher incidence of sexual side effects occurring in the men who were warned about side effects. And keep in mind, chums, that the men who were warned about side effects were just told about the clinically verified side effects that happen in about 2% of the population, like low libido and erectile dysfunction. So if just that were enough to give a significant amount of people side effects, imagine how bad it would be if they were told the side effects could be permanent. And again, if finasteride caused neurological side effects and persistent side effects, you'd expect dutasteride would do the same thing, and even more so, especially since unlike finasteride, dutasteride suppresses the type 1 5-AR isoenzyme, which is responsible for neurosteroid formation in the brain. Despite this, dutasteride is not known to cause any neurological side effects, and reports about post-dutasteride syndrome are practically non-existent, and I made a video discussing that, which I'll link below. So, when the media is attacking finasteride, they're not just going after the drug, they're going after you. They're helping spread fear and ignorance about a drug whose safety profile was already well established decades ago, and they're doing it at a time when finasteride is facing the biggest threat ever to its existence. No matter how anyone feels about finasteride, nobody has the right to take away your medical sovereignty and deny you a drug that you choose to use and which was prescribed to you by a medical professional. The time has come for all people, hair loss switchers and everybody else, to fight back against this kind of tyranny and let these bureaucrats know that we will hold them accountable if they try to deny us the healthcare determined between us and our doctors. And we should also be highly critical and contact these media outlets to let them know that we certainly don't approve of them abandoning all their journalistic integrity by publishing such biased rubbish. We deserve better than this, and if we sit around doing nothing, then before we know it, we're going to wake up one morning to only find out that finasteride has become a Schedule III controlled substance. Finasteride is a wonderful drug that not only stops hair loss, but has a plethora of other magnificent health and longevity benefits that are currently being investigated as we speak. To lose access to this amazing drug would be an absolute travesty that would set back scientific progress for the entire world. So are there any solutions to this? Well, I think one thing that might help would be to get Brian Johnson to start promoting finasteride. I know right now the YouTube channel What I've Learned is creating a hit piece on Brian Johnson where he is trashing him in a series of video shorts on a daily basis. Mr. Johnson, if by any chance you're watching this video, I want you to know that I've already scientifically dismantled What I've Learned 2 times, including just a couple of weeks ago where I absolutely tore apart his seed oil video, which I'll link below. If you publicly come out in favor of oral finasteride and make a video or write an article discussing its health benefits, then I personally will tear apart What I've Learned's hit piece about you on your behalf. Just watch my video on What I've Learned and trust me, I can tear this guy to absolute pieces and I'll be happy to do so if only you help us defend finasteride. For everybody else, I've already made several videos in my Brian Johnson playlist that I'll link below that explain why finasteride is an excellent longevity drug that will help Brian Johnson become immortal so he can become the God Emperor of Arrakis! I already know that Brian Johnson takes topical finasteride, so perhaps just maybe he can be convinced to bring more positive attention to oral finasteride by adding it to his stack for longevity purposes. So, I'm sorry to bring you this bad news, chums. I really wish I had more influence, as it definitely frustrates me that I don't have more power to stop this kind of injustice. That's why I'm bringing up more influential people who might be able to help us. But I want all of you to rest assured that no matter what happens with finasteride in this EMA decision, even if it's the worst possible outcome, we'll still figure out what to do next, and we will never surrender because we are hair loss witchers. Don't fuck with us. I'll see you all next time, hair loss witchers. Thank you for watching. God bless.